Motion in your step.
Motivation in your heart.
Hello, and welcome to today's Motion and Motivation podcast.
We've put together a study guide for everyone. If you need it, you can grab it from the video description.
This biography, Confidence Man, is really something. I mean, it takes us from his childhood all the way to the White House.
Yeah, it's kind of like trying to piece together what we see in the headlines, get a sense of the man behind them.
Exactly. And one thing that really struck me, even early on in the book, was this, I don't know, almost like obsession with fame he seems to have, like even as a kid.
Well, you see it pop up in all these little anecdotes. Like, he wasn't content just owning the Plaza Hotel. He had to be in Home Alone, too.
Speaking of which, it's funny you mention that. The book talks about how he used to call himself publicity shy. Which, come on, a little ironic,
Right.
Yeah.
Not shy at all. He just craved that attention, wanted to be recognized. And it really seemed to fuel his ambition, especially when he set his sights on Manhattan real estate.
Well, and that makes me think his father had already built a successful business in Brooklyn, though maybe a bit more, I don't know, under the radar than Donald would end up being.
Yeah. Fred Trump, totally different approach. But Donald, he wanted to make a splash. And what better place than Manhattan? You look at those early moves, going after high-profile properties from Penn Central, the Commodore Hotel, right there by Grand Central. Talk about a power move.
It wasn't just ambition, though, was it?
Yeah.
The book really gave me the sense that he was willing to kind of bend the rules a little.
Yeah.
I mean, push the limits, maybe even misrepresent his financial situation to get ahead.
Yeah. Confidence Man definitely doesn't shy away from that. It talks about this willingness to operate, and I quote, outside conventional business norms. And you can almost draw a line straight from those early moves to the rest of his career. That risk-taking, pushing the envelope, it becomes a pattern.
Did he ever face any consequences for those tactics back then?
Oh, for sure there were consequences. I mean, he had his wins. You think about the Wollman Rink renovation, which, let's be honest, he got every photo op he could out of that.
Oh, yeah.
But then you have the spectacular failures.
Like multiple bankruptcies.
Exactly. And the Taj Mahal Casino in Atlantic City, prime example. It's almost like a classic Trump story. Big dreams, shaky financing, a very public fall from grace.
And yet he always seemed to bounce back.
And that's the other side of it, right? He was incredibly skilled at shaping the narrative. He could spin even his setbacks into some sort of victory. He understood the importance of perception, even way back then, long before social media came along.
Well, and he did have Roy Cohn in his corner for a lot of that, which... Talk about a ruthless mentor.
Oh, yeah. No, that is a fascinating dynamic. Cohn, former McCarthy associate, taught Trump a lot about using aggressive tactics. Never back down, always counterattack, exploit every weakness you can find.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
It's like Trump 101, right? And you see those lessons playing out in every aspect of his life, business, politics, even his personal relationships.
Speaking of his personal life, the book really delves into his relationship with Ivana. And, she wasn't just his wife. She played a big part in building his business empire, too.
Oh, absolutely. She was instrumental in some of his biggest projects. I mean, running the Plaza Hotel, that's huge. But, looking at their relationship, it kind of reflects that broader pattern in how he approaches things. Transactional, often volatile, and everything playing out on the public stage.
Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about his relationship with his father, Fred. The book portrays it as, well, complicated is an understatement, I think.
It really was. You get this strong sense of Donald always wanting his father's approval, but also constantly trying to escape his shadow. It's almost Shakespearean, honestly. This, like the ambitious son and the demanding father, this constant battle for power and recognition. It's a theme that just seems to come up again and again throughout his life.
It really does. So he'd conquered, at least in his mind, the New York real estate world. His name was synonymous with success. And then we see him start to test the political waters a bit. What struck me is how he was donating to both Democrats and Republicans.
He was hedging his bets, right? Playing both sides. I mean, Trump was always a pragmatist at heart, cultivating those relationships with anyone he thought could be beneficial, whether it was the mayor or a union boss, didn't matter.
But the book suggests his interest in politics went beyond just being pragmatic. Like, he'd been toying with the idea of running for office for years at that point.
Oh, yeah. There was even a sort of trial run back in 1988. He toured New Hampshire, started talking policy. There's actually a speech from back then where he criticizes Japan for, quote, taking advantage of the U.S. Sound familiar?
He really does. But then he backs off. Why do you think that was?
Well, my guess is he realized that winning wasn't a sure thing. And Trump doesn't like to lose.
Almost makes you wonder if he needed to, I don't know, strategize a bit,
Yeah.
figure out how to guarantee a win next time around, which kind of makes you think about the timing of that whole birtherism thing, doesn't it?
It really does. Was that his way of staying relevant? I mean, keeping his name in the news cycle?
Well, and he really played it up, even after Obama released his birth certificate.
Yeah, but it worked, didn't it? He was tapping into something real, this undercurrent of like distrust in authority that would end up being a major theme when he ran for president.
He had a way of sensing those feelings, those frustrations,
Okay.
and really using them to his advantage.
Absolutely.
So then 2011 rolls around. He's dipping his toes back into the political pond, right?
Yeah.
This time at CPAC. And that speech, that felt like a turning point.
Oh, 100%. That was him going full on red meat for the Republican base, attacking Obama, China, even questioning if the U.S. should be involved in NATO. It was like he was auditioning.
For the role of Republican frontrunner.
Exactly. Makes you wonder if he already had his sights set on the presidency at that point.
It's possible, isn't it?
Oh, that ambition was definitely there. And don't forget, this was all happening as the Tea Party movement was gaining steam. Trump was in the perfect position to ride that wave of kind of populist anger. He was speaking directly to the people who felt ignored by the quote-unquote establishment.
He knew how to read a room,
Yeah.
knew what people wanted to hear.
He did. And he also knew how to use the media. Even when they were criticizing him, he was using it to his advantage.
All publicity is good publicity, right?
Right.
So 2015, he's ready, announces his candidacy, and, I mean, the rest is history, as they say. But I gotta ask, did anyone really take him seriously at first? I mean, a reality TV star.
I think a lot of people were skeptical, that's for sure.
I can imagine.
But he had this ability, right, to tap into that, what do they call it, the zeitgeist. He understood the frustrations of people who felt left behind, globalization, a changing economy.
He was a master of branding himself, wasn't he? Creating this persona that resonated with a certain segment of the population.
Totally. And this was when he really mastered social media, too, bypassing the gatekeepers and speaking directly to voters.
Yeah, his whole campaign was like nothing we'd ever seen. Those rallies, the constant tweets, the controversies. It really show playing out on the national stage.
And his family was a huge part of it, too, especially his kids. They were his advisors, sounding boards, even surrogates out there on the campaign trail.
Right, Ivanka, Jared, Don Jr., and they were all bringing their own business experience to the table, which I imagine shaped how he approached the presidency.
Oh, absolutely. They had a hand in policy, choosing cabinet members, even crafting his public image. It was a real family affair in a way that American politics hadn't really seen before.
But, I mean, the controversies didn't stop once he was in office, did they? The
No.
Russia investigation loomed over his entire presidency.
It did. And the book dives into all the different parts of that. The meetings, phone calls, the whole question of collusion.
It's a complicated story.
It is.
And, it's interesting. You think about how Trump reacted to that investigation. He wasn't just denying it.
Yeah.
He went on the attack. The investigators, the media, even the intelligence community.
Yeah, witch hunt, deep state, all of it.
It was a level of defiance that we just haven't seen from presidents in the past.
It was, and it worked, didn't it?
I mean, it did.
His supporters, they rallied around him, saw him as this victim of, again, like we said, this kind of deep state conspiracy.
And it felt like the more he was attacked, the more his base rallied around him. Like the controversy just fueled their support.
Totally. And he kept pushing the boundaries of like what's acceptable for a president, the Twitter attacks, insulting entire countries, undermining the press.
It was a lot, wasn't
It
it?
was exhausting.
It really was. Every day felt like a new scandal.
Right.
But he did manage to keep some of his campaign promises.
He did. He got those 2 conservative justices on the Supreme Court, passed that big tax cut, rolled back regulations.
Love him or hate him, you can't say he didn't have an impact.
No, you can't.
And then, of course, there was COVID. And this book doesn't hold back on criticizing his response, does it?
No, it really doesn't. Confidence Man basically lays out the case that he downplayed the threat, ignored experts, and that the administration's response was, well, pretty chaotic.
And a lot of people suffered as a result.
That's the really tragic part.
Yeah. And then, of course, you have the 2020 election, which he loses, but then refuses to concede.
Right. Claiming it was rigged, massive voter fraud, all of it. It was a wild time.
It really was.
He tries to get the courts to overturn the results, right? Tried to find more votes, but nothing panned out.
And then January 6th happens.
Right.
This mob of his supporters storms the Capitol trying to stop the whole election certification process.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still hard to wrap your head around that.
Absolutely shocking. A real dark day for democracy in this country. And what's crazy is that even after the violence, even after all the legal stuff fell apart, he kept pushing that narrative about a stolen election.
It's like he just couldn't accept it. Like admitting defeat would somehow shatter this image he'd built up over all those years.
And that gets to one of the big takeaways from Confidence Man. You know, this book, it's not just a timeline of events. It really tries to get inside his head, understand the why behind his actions. And one thing that's clear is this deep need to be seen as a winner, no matter what.
And he was willing to bend reality to do it? Create his own version of events just to protect that image.
Exactly. Which brings us back to something we touched on earlier. The book really highlights this gap between Trump's public persona, Mr. Confident Success Tycoon, and what people who worked closely with him actually saw.
Right, they paint a different picture, don't they?
They do. Someone who could be impulsive or erratic, even unkind at times.
It makes you wonder how much of what we see, especially now with social media, how much is real? How do you even know what to believe anymore?
It's tough, right? It's like we're living in Trump's world now, this constant flood of information, all these different stories competing for our attention.
So how do we cut through all that noise?
We have to be skeptical, have to question what we see and hear, look for evidence. And sometimes the most important clues aren't in what's being said, but what's being left unsaid.
It's like that old saying, there's 3 sides to every story. Your side, my side, and the truth.
Exactly. And finding that truth, that's the hard part. It takes effort.
Right.
We can't just accept whatever we're being fed. We have to dig deeper, challenge our assumptions, look at things from different angles.
This has been a fascinating deep dive, I gotta say, but also a little unsettling.
How so?
I don't know. It just makes you realize how easy it is to get manipulated, how important it is to stay informed and to think for yourself.
I think that's a great takeaway, honestly. The power of biography, right? Looking at someone's past to understand their present and maybe even learn something about ourselves along the way.
So where do we go from here?
Keep learning, keep asking questions, and never stop searching for the truth, no matter how messy it might be.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, we'll leave you all to ponder that. This has been The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. That way you won't miss any of our updates. Also, if you think this video could help others, please share it with them. Thanks for watching and for your support.